Testing for YouTube. Testing 1, 2, 3.
All right, it is 2 o'clock, if I may. I'd like to call this meeting, regular council meeting to order for the City of Port Alberni, May 27th at 2 o'clock in council chambers. First of all, council would like to acknowledge that and recognize that we work, live, and play in the City of Port Alberni, which is situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Seychot and Hoopachesset First Nations. We have an agenda here. Do we have any late items identified by city councilors? Councilor Solda.
Yes, I would like to add just a discussion on uptown, what's happening uptown. I guess that's probably easier just to write uptown.
All right, so we have new business 1 and 2. I believe we can have that as L3 new business, I believe. Uptown discussion, we'll call it. Is there any other councilors that have items they'd like to put on the agenda for today's meeting? No? Any late items identified by the corporate officer?
Thank you. Just one. We just received Councillor Solda's report for council, so that has been circulated, but we'll add that to the agenda as well, please.
Yes, indeed. Oh, Councillor Solda, you've missed your opportunity. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Solda.
I know how nice you are, so it's good. I would like to also add just an update on Port Pub, just maybe when it's going to come to council for the public from our CAO.
All righty, unless there's any objections from staff, we'll put that as L4 Port Pub, okay? Just in case there was anything that was sensitive there.
Yep.
All righty, let's see here. So, notice of video recording. This is being live streamed, recorded, and broadcast on YouTube. So can I have a motion that the agenda be approved as now amended? Councillor Dame. Seconder. Councillor Solda. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. We have minutes of the special meeting held 9:30 a.m. and regular council meeting held at 2 p.m. on May 13th as presented. Can I have a motion to adopt, or if there's any discussion?
Move to adopt.
Councillor Solda moved to adopt. Seconder. Councillor Dame. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. We have no delegations today. We have no unfinished business. So we will move to staff reports. Accounts. I believe that's Councillor Solda.
Yes, I'd like to move that the certification of the Director of Finance dated May 27th, 2024 be received and checks numbered 154-876 to 154-965 and inclusive in payment of accounts totaling $2,648,426.26 be approved.
Thank you, Councillor Solda. Is there a seconder for that? Second, Councillor Dame. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Next up is bylaws, page 10 of your agenda for all those people at home. We have OCP and zoning amendments at this time. Who would like to speak on that, or are we just going for motions at this point?
Thank you. I was going to say I'm happy to present if you'd like, or if you'd like to move to motions, you're welcome to do that as well. So.
Well, it is an agenda and we are reading for the third time, so it has come to council before. Is there any discussion on the zoning amendment, or so the amendment would be to 2856 4th Avenue, bylaw number 5098. Is there any discussion from councilors at this time? Seeing none, we have motions available here. Can we have a Councillor Haggard?
Thank you, Acting Mayor Mealy. I'd like to move that official community plan amendment 2856 4th Avenue, bylaw number 5098 be read a third time.
Do you have a seconder? Second is Councillor Dame. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Councillor Haggard?
I'd like to move that zoning amendment 2856 4th Avenue, bylaw 5099 be read a third time.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Dame. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Councillor Haggard.
I'd like to move that official community plan amendment 2856 4th Avenue, bylaw number 5098 be now finally adopted, signed by the mayor and corporate officer, and number 5098.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dame. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Councillor Haggard.
I'd like to move that zoning amendment 2856 4th Avenue, bylaw number 5099 be now finally adopted, signed by the mayor and corporate officer, and numbered 5099.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Haggard. or Councillor Dame, sorry. And any other discussion? If not, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Next up, we have zoning bylaw number 5105, small scale multi-unit housing, or SSMU in my case. And if we could have a quick update, that'd be great. Manager of Planning?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So for council's consideration today, as you mentioned, is the small-scale multi-unit housing update to the zoning bylaw. Is actually, we are proposing a new zoning bylaw that would repeal and replace the old one. And that bylaw number is 5105. So the purpose of this update is to comply with changes to the Local Government Act made under Bill 44 by the provincial government. And under this bill and the changes that were made to the LGA, the city is required to enable what they're calling small-scale multi-unit housing and accessory dwelling units in all single detached and duplex zones, with some minor exceptions. And the city must comply with this new legislation by June 30th, 2024, which means updating the city's zoning bylaw. And as I mentioned, we've chosen to take a path where we just repeal the old one and bring in a new one due to the scale of the changes. For a bit of background, in winter 2024, the Ministry of Housing released a policy manual for the new regulations under Bill 44. This accompanied the new legislation, but came a few months later. And that policy manual must be considered by the city when we make these zoning bylaw updates. And within that manual and within the legislation, the city must enable 3 to 4 dwelling units on residential lots. And that's most residential lots in the city. The city must also update these regulations so that they're not a barrier to this new housing being built. And so we have to be very conscious with the regulations we propose. In terms of those key changes, the intent of this zoning bylaw 5105 is solely to meet the requirements of Bill 44. And the changes that are proposed consider that policy manual from the province. And we've looked at the legislation and the policy manual, which we're required to consider, and proposed regulations that would work with Port Alberni in our local context, because every community is different. And those key changes we've proposed to the zoning bylaw are updated and simplified residential zones, updated accessory dwelling unit and secondary suite regulations, updated general regs, updated parking regs, and some new definitions which help enable these changes. One of the major changes, obviously, is the residential zones. And one of the big moves there is consolidating our several low-density residential zones into one primary residential zone. And in this simple graphic, you can see how we have many zones, and there's now one. And this graphic just gives you a sense of how that massing and lot size is proposed to change. Similarly, with the rural zones, we had 2 fairly large rural zoning designations, collapsing that down into one rural regulation as well. And for both this residential zone and the rural residential zone, 3 to 4 dwelling units would be permitted on those lots, with some minor exceptions based on lot size and city services. For example, areas of town that are zoned rural residential currently, if they're missing water service or missing sewer service, the max you're allowed to have under this new bylaw is still just a house and a secondary suite. So there were exceptions built into the legislation that took those things into account. In the new R and RR zones, we've made moves to reduce barriers to the development of housing in line with the provincial guidance. We've made it fairly flexible so that any combination of that small-scale housing and the ADUs can be permitted on the property. We're not saying that you can only do one house and one ADU and one secondary suite. It's kind of left more flexible, which is the intent of the legislation. We've reduced frontage and lot size requirements, reduced setbacks for the front yard and backyard to allow for more flexible building styles, and increased building height to 1 meter over what we currently have in the zoning bylaw for residential buildings, and increased site coverage to account for having more units on a lot. And there's some other more general enabling updates, and I call them enabling updates because it's other updates we had to make to the zoning text just to make it possible to build multiple units on a lot. So reducing the minimum width of a dwelling unit, that's one we had in there. Making some changes to support lane access to residential dwellings, adding requirements for landscaping because these are going to be dense sites potentially. Relaxing some of those ADU regulations so you can fit a laneway house or a granny suite on your property. And clarifying emergency access for additional units because we have to maintain pathways for firefighters, for example, and paramedics. And we've updated some parking regulations, so we've changed it so that the R and RR zone would be required to provide one parking stall per dwelling unit, and then enabled tandem parking in limited arrangements and clarified driveway access, because some of those rules had to be touched up. In terms of communications, we issued public notice prior to this meeting. I mean, it was advertised in the May 15th and May 22nd papers. We made documents available online, and there were copies for viewing at City Hall. And we had to issue this notice before the meeting because under this new legislation, a public hearing cannot be held for this bylaw if its sole purpose is to comply with Bill 44 and the subsequent legislation. And through our posting of the public notice, we have not yet received any public correspondence to date. And we sent the draft bylaw to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for early feedback, and they've provided no comments yet at this time. In terms of next steps, and you may have other questions about changes happening with provincial legislation and city bylaws, there's a lot going on right now. As I mentioned, this update is solely to address the changes under Bill 44 with the small-scale multi-unit housing. We are also doing the official community plan update in 2024, and then planning for another full zoning bylaw overhaul in 2025 that we would work with council on, and then having to do future updates to the zoning bylaw and other bylaws to meet the new legislation that is already here or is forthcoming. That includes the development and amenity cost charges, density bonusing, inclusionary zoning, affordable housing during building and rezoning, works and services that the city is now allowed to ask for upon development, and tenant protections under Bill 16 that was recently received royal assent. So those are other issues forthcoming for council if they direct us to bring them up or staff brings them for council input. A lot of the future initiatives that are already in legislation are voluntary, like council can pass a bylaw to enable these things, whereas the changes under Bill 44 we're proposing today, they were mandatory. At least the updating of the bylaws was mandatory. So options for council is that the zoning bylaw 5105-2024 be introduced and read for a first, second, and third time, or that council provide an alternative direction to staff by resolution. And we are recommending that the bylaw does receive first, second, and third readings today. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Appreciate that. Questions from council? Councilor Haggard has Randa first.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Mealy. Brian, I'm sure your department has been on the mini calls with the province, and I'm sure you've had lots of discussion around this within the planning department. But my question is, our concern is, with the increased density, how is that going to impact our infrastructure, specifically our water and sewer lines? I'm sure that's a concern with a lot of the communities, because you're like tripling the amount of people that are using it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And that is something that many cities are tackling right now. Fortunately, when we upgrade the bylaws in this way to allow the infill on residential lots, it's expected to be very slow and to occur over time to give us enough of an opportunity to plan for upgrading and renewing infrastructure or building new infrastructure where needed. And the biggest component of that is going to be the city's infrastructure master plan that is just embarking on, which is really good timing, actually, where when the engineering department undertakes this planning over the next year, they're going to have to look at this SMOO legislation and how these neighborhoods could now have the potential to densify. And we, in the planning department, we're also working with a consultant at the moment on a complete communities assessment. And part of that is they're analyzing our neighborhood to see what is the actual likelihood that people are going to develop these fourplexes, threeplexes, according to this legislation. We're expecting that information this summer or fall.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Councilor Haggard. Thank you, Brian. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll just pick up on that last comment, which is in analyzing the likelihood, that's really hot mic, of people developing fourplexes or four units on one current single family lot. What analysis has been done for sites that are simply not going to fall into the categories available for development? So even though we have new bylaws that ease development along those lines, there will be lots that are currently too small or don't have available parking access to add any additional units. And those lots then presumably will be less in demand on the open market, whereas the lots beside them that can be developed will be more in demand. And I'm concerned that we'll create an atmosphere here without that the current proposed bylaw may create an atmosphere that we need to have some consideration towards to rectify that will basically landlock certain properties to be undesirable and thereby fall into disrepair and thereby cause a blight in the midst of a newly developed neighborhood. Any observations or comments with regards to that? And particularly any suggestions that we could do to avoid that from occurring?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Patola. I think it's, I'm not quite entirely certain what you mean by landlocked, but perhaps it's the, and maybe you can just clarify. I mean, if there's infill development around a property that's not suitable for development itself, is that correct? Okay, so yeah, the legislation itself, it does allow different development potential based on size of the property. So if the property is over, I believe it's 280 meters squared, you're allowed to build 4 units. If it's under 280 meters squared, you're allowed to build 3 units. But there's not much difference there. 280 meters squared is an incredibly small lot, and any architect or builder, for that matter, would be very challenged to put 3 units on it. And a lot of this legislation leaves so much of that development and the choices around that development up to the private market and up to designers to actually figure out how to fit units on their lot. And we've been instructed through that policy guidance to make our regulations as flexible as possible. And some properties will be able to fit 4 units, others will maybe still be only able to develop what they have now, which is a single family home. And you will have neighborhoods where there are 4 units on one lot and then 1 unit on the next and 3 on the other. And it could be different types of buildings and compositions. There could be 1 single detached home here with 2 ADUs and a secondary suite, and then a 4-unit townhouse right beside it. And all of these challenges will be navigated by us and the province over the coming years. And we do expect that we do not have all the answers at this time, but that these zoning bylaws in our city and other cities will grow over time, and they will need housekeeping amendments in coming years to to keep our bylaws up to date with the changing nature of residential development. And I'm happy to follow up if there's anything I've missed in your question, Councillor.
No, thank you, but that does bring me to my next question, which is the Minister of Housing has said publicly a number of times, as has the Premier, that the private market will not solve the housing crisis in BC. Yet I note that some of these proposed regulations for particularly C7, which I realize is commercial, but commercial 7 emphasizes density bonusing for parking and for commercial space, but not for low-cost housing or accessible housing. And since the city's strategic plan is directed specifically at housing for all, would it not be better to change the density bonusing, even though we can always change something in the future, and I know we can always talk to the future, and the OCP is going to be in the future, and there's going to be more bylaws in the future. But right now, so when a developer comes through tomorrow, should we not be aligning this bylaw with the city's strategic plan to emphasize low-cost housing, accessible housing, housing for all over parking spaces?
Through the chair to Councillor Patola. In short, yes, if that's council's direction, council's strategic priorities, affordable housing, we should be doing more with our bylaws because as they are set up currently, they're not really adequate for us to get affordable housing or inclusionary housing as is upon new development. So this, just to clarify for everyone, that the current zoning bylaw update is solely for the residential zone legislation, whereas the density bonusing and other measures that affect commercial and multifamily development, that is just not included in this amendment, but there has been a lot of new legislation coming from the province in Bill 16 that speaks to what cities can do now in terms of getting affordable and inclusionary housing in the development process. And a lot of that is council is now able to pass a bylaw that clearly states what it's looking for in terms of affordable housing upon development. And there's a lot of new rules around that, and I won't go into too much detail, but basically it's a lot more strict where council has to actually prove that the amount of affordable housing they're asking for is financially viable upon development. So the exchange between how much density you get for what you provide in terms of affordable housing has to pencil out in a financial analysis, and the city will have to report that to the province. So that is a whole bunch of work that we want to take on. It's most appropriate from a planning perspective that we take that on after we have all of council's and the community's policy in writing in the OCP. But to get back to the beginning of councillor's question, the current density bonusing is not really adequate to get affordable housing. And there is a density bonus provided. If a developer comes to town and they want a bit more density, they can provide affordable housing with a housing agreement, 10% of units for 10 years. But the amount of density the city provides is not enough of a financial incentive for developers to actually provide affordable housing, and that's where those regulations have not really been sufficient and where you're probably seeing that not come through in new development.
Fair enough. I will leave the question about what the city has been doing since we invoked our strategic plan to encourage accessible and low-cost housing for another day. Await that. So carrying on then with the concept of housing that is suitable to different levels of income. We currently have bylaws, and I suspect you're going to say this bylaw rewrite is not directed at this issue, but I note that we currently allow the keeping of bees, poultry, and market gardens. I would expect that an increase in density on a lot would affect the functional ability to do the same. Any comments or observations on that issue?
Through the chair to Councillor Petola. Yeah, and that's an excellent point. Obviously, with dense development, we have to manage the impacts on property much more closely. And we did not look at the beekeeping or the hens and chickens portion of the general regulations with this review. We tried to keep it fairly laser focused, and I think that's going to take a little bit more research to see what high density beekeeping looks like, but you're correct, that does need to be reviewed.
Thank you. Carrying on, in that light, I wonder if you could explain why the permission of greenhouses is only on lots greater than 1 acre.
Through the chair to Councillor Petola. And just to clarify, people are allowed to build greenhouses on their property. How we specified this in the new rural zone is specifically conducting agriculture on rural lots that are larger than 1 acre. There's nothing in our bylaws to say that if you have a smaller lot, you can't have a greenhouse. People do have that option. It's just that we do see it obviously on larger lots. But as far as I know, unless I've missed something, there's no restrictions on a greenhouse. It's just, the restriction is on the intensive agriculture.
Thank you. We're getting to the end of my list, and I hope you realize that I did provide this to you before the meeting.
Yes, thank you.
So my next, second to last question would be, I note that the parking requirements for all of the new R and RM zones are 1 parking space per dwelling. And yet, council recently passed a CD5 comprehensive development zone for Kingsway that was specifically reduced the number of parking below 1 per unit, partly, and I can't speak for all of council, but partly in my mind for the purposes of complying with carbon reduction planning within the city. I'm wondering what consideration, if any, was given to adoption of a lower level of parking per unit, or if this was just following the recommendations in the handbook from the province.
Through the chair to Councillor Patola. Actually, to clarify, the provincial recommendations in the policy manual that we referenced, they actually suggest going as low as possible to remove all parking requirements, especially to do it in walkable neighborhoods where you can get to commercial services within a 5 or 10-minute walk. We've taken a fairly conservative approach by lowering the current 1.25 parking stall requirement down to 1. And a lot of this comes, we're just not quite there yet as a community with our active transportation. We feel to the point where people can reasonably live in many of our neighborhoods without having a car. And we think we may be able to lower those parking requirements even further than 1 per unit once we do a bit more review into future active transportation planning, our new official community plan that's coming up, and then maybe actually future parking management strategies the city might develop. Because as soon as you remove the parking requirements or lower them in residential areas, people only have the option of parking on the street, especially in a community where we're still trying to build our bike lanes and other infrastructure. But yes, you're correct. A lot of the guidance and actually good planning recommendations is to make those parking requirements as low as possible if people have another option other than using a car.
And finally, of particular interest to me is reviewing the minimum setbacks and density requirements for a campground is now, with the changes to the R and RM zones, is significantly less dense than actual building a house or permanent establishment. Are there plans in the future or any considerations to adjusting campground density and setback requirements accordingly so they are in keeping with the single house or single residence requirements?
Through the chair to Councillor Patola, we have not looked at the campground requirements thoroughly, especially not with this bylaw update. And that would be something that we would look at, unless directed by council. We would probably come back to it with the zoning bylaw overhaul in 2025. I don't personally, professionally, don't know enough about campgrounds, but I'm fairly certain those have not been reviewed in quite some time, and there could be opportunity for change, but we would have to look at that at a future date.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Patola, for all your questions. Appreciate that. Councillor Solda was next.
Just a quick question. Someone wise told me whenever I talk about affordable housing, Cindy, what is affordable housing? Because affordable is different in Vancouver. Affordable is different in Port Alberni. And that person sitting in this room that told me this would say this to me. So I'm kind of curious, what is affordable housing here in this community? Is this because of the government, whatever the government puts out, or is it, how does that work in Port Alberni?
Through the chair to Councillor Solda. That's a very large question, probably more than we can answer right now, but affordable housing has many definitions. This legislation in particular is trying to tackle affordable housing by increasing the supply of housing. Generally, in principle, in a free market, the more housing that is on the market, the less those units will cost to live in, whether it's to buy or to rent. So this legislation is increasing supply all across the province at the same time to prevent a land rush in any one community or any one location, with the idea that over time there will be tens of thousands of more dwelling units on the market in BC, immediately by removing the restrictive zonings that city have put in place that limit the number of units on a property to 1. And in that way, they're trying to create affordable housing. And then the other side of that is subsidized housing or reduced rent housing, where if you go by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation definition, the definition of affordable housing is 30% of your gross income. BC Housing takes that number and they tie that 30% of your gross income to an average rent for Port Alberni, and there is a number they put out for Port Alberni, and so we tie it to that income number. So many different definitions and way of calculating it, but this legislation is trying to create more affordable options for people by increasing market supply of housing.
And it's a really hard one to call because in Port Alberni or in a lot of the communities, affordable housing, even subsidized housing, there's not enough. I mean, there's a small percentage of apartments being built, and they're only a percentage of those units are subsidized, and the rest is market value. So, and there's a lot of people, when you talk about the market, like rental right now, in Port Alberni's like close to $2,000 for some places, and people are using all their money on rent, if any. If they don't have enough, they're in their cars or wherever they are. So we have homeless situation going on. So I don't know. I just find it really frustrating when we talk about, and it's not just us, it's government, provincial, and everybody talking about affordability. It's not affordability. People can't afford it, plus groceries and everything else. So it's really frustrating. Thank you.
I believe Councillor Patola had an additional question. Councillor Patola.
I did, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my last question, which I just kind of came into my mind, is that I note that a lot of these regulations surround access to the property and access to the units, dwelling units positioned on the property. Most of them from the roadway with parking off the roadway, but some from lane access. And I note that the lanes in Port Alberni are not like the lanes I grew up with in downtown Vancouver that were 3 lanes wide and paved and had curbs and completely developed. Our lanes are much smaller, often unkept, and I'm just wondering what obligations will befall to the city now to maintain the lanes and enforce bylaws against anybody that might be trespassing on city property within a lane.
Through the chair to Councillor Patola. Very good point to raise, because with a lot of with the changes we're proposing to the zoning bylaw, we do make it a bit more flexible to develop in a way that depends on laneway access to the additional units on your property. And to be very honest, even from a planning perspective, the greatest benefit to densifying in residential neighborhoods or the greatest utility you have is that laneway access. It's so key to getting more housing. Port Alberni is in a really beneficial position that there are so many laneways. But as you mentioned, a lot of them are small, they're narrow. These neighborhoods were subdivided 100 years ago in many cases. So many of the lanes, there's a level of service and a level of maintenance on them, which could be improved, which you've notified or you've indicated. It'll be really important for the city to look at all of these laneways and how the neighborhoods are likely to densify in the master infrastructure strategy and plan. I mean, there's just no way around it. The city will have to start managing its lanes if they're going to experience more traffic. And it's going to be the most important around the commercial centers where there's a lot of housing or a lot of multifamily housing in addition to commercial development, and they're going to see the most use. So there will have to be a plan for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Councillor Dame.
Thank you. Through the chair to the manager of planning. I just wanted to say that I thought this report was very well done, and it made a lot of things clear to me that previously were unclear, and so I appreciate it. I would like to go ahead and make these motions, if I may. I move that zoning bylaw number 5105/2024 be now introduced and read a first time.
I'll second that.
Councillor Haggard, moved by Councillor Dame, second by Councillor Haggard. Any other discussion at this time? Other than, yes, it was a great report. Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Appreciate that. And this is on page 28 of the agenda for everybody at home. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Go ahead there, Councillor Dame.
I move that zoning bylaw number 5105/2024 be read a second time.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Dame. Councillor Haggard, any other discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Councillor Dame.
And I move that zoning bylaw number 5105/2024 be read a third time.
And I'll second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dame. Councillor Haggard, any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you to our fine planning department. Appreciate it. Just for note, and I apologize, during the agenda, we talked about the committee of the whole meeting, that Councillor Solda had a notice of motion that she wanted to present at this meeting, but we're going to do that later. It didn't say it on the agenda, but we'll do it before question period if that's okay to everybody involved. All right, just want to make notice of that. We have correspondence for action now, page 158 of our fine agenda, and it looks like we have the Community Arts Council with a request for road closure.
Thank you. Just briefly, yeah, we received a request just to close off portions of the Harbor Key for the Solstice Art Festival. That does include most of the parking access, just for council's awareness. So they will obviously have to work with administration and staff to work on what they're required to do as far as barricading. Yeah, so they'll work with administration for the background of it, but that is the request is basically to close that whole portion there.
All right, we have a motion that is proposed at this time. Councillors, we'd like to, Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Subject to any questions beyond making the motion, I would like to make the motion that council authorize the Community Arts Council request for a road closure at the entrance of the Harbor Key for the purposes of the Solstice Art Festival on Saturday, June 15, 2024, from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., subject to the listed requirements.
Second by Councillor Solda. And just to also note that there will be an event, I was talking with staff earlier, there's an event at Tyee Landing that day as well in conjunction, a car show. So that is being put on by Port Poshwash, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a lot going on that weekend down at the Harbor Key, so come on down. So, and as Councillor Patola said, the provisions are notification of emergency services, BC Transit, consultation with the affected businesses and residents, implementation of a traffic safety plan to be approved by the City of Port Alberni, including qualified traffic control personnel as required, and the provision of standard liability insurance in the amount of $5 million. Councillor Patola was the mover. Councillor Solda was the seconder, if I'm not mistaken. Trying to keep track. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. We wish the Community Arts Council the best for their upcoming event. No proclamations at this time, so we have correspondence for action. Madam Corporate Officer.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a brief overview of the correspondence received. So we received correspondence from UBCM regarding the council AVICC resolutions that will be going forward to UBCM in the fall. Just as a very brief overview of those, there's the enhancing communications for fire departments responding to motor vehicle incidents, equitable funding of police services, increased funding for rural colleges, sustainable and equitable funding of library services, pre-hospital care demands on local government, and pre-hospital care cover costs of local governments. Following that, we have a communication update from BC Transit on their strategic plan, and just a letter from the Government of Canada regarding the support from the City of Port Alberni for Loaves and Fishes Community Food Bank's grant application, merely just acknowledging that they've received that. We've received correspondence from the ACRD of their regular newsletter, and lastly from the Honourable Gord Johns regarding our appreciation for our supporting of Bill C-310.
Thank you very much to our corporate officer. Is there anything the council would like to talk about on our correspondence at this point? Councillor Haggard.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Mealy. I just want to commend our council for being much more proactive and sending in many more resolutions than we typically do to AVICC, and they've been forwarded on to UBCM. So I think that speaks well for our council. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, it looks like there's 6 there, so good work by council. Any other councillors like to pull anything out of the correspondence for action? Seeing none, can we have a receipt of the do we need a motion to receive? Yes. Yes, no, maybe so. Councillor Patola is going to do it anyways. Seconded by Councillor Solda. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Report from in camera. Council release for public consumption, the removal of council liaison from the Community Action Team Committee. Is there any, Councillor Haggard?
Thank you. I just got an email from the chair of the Community Action Team prior to the meeting, and he would like to thank the city for all their support and hopes to continue working closely with the city to work on the war against the opioid crisis in our community.
Thank you, Councillor Hager, and thank you for all your hard work. Anybody else would like to have a discussion on this? And seeing none, we don't need receipt of this one. It's just a notification, I believe. That's right. Next up will be council reports, council and resolution reports. We have one that came in from Councillor Solda as a late item. Is there anything that council would like to pull out, talk about? Councillor Solda.
Thank you. I would like to talk about Porta Players and the North Island Zone Festival that they just had here, and it wound up on Friday, and they won 8 awards, and that's with 5 North Island zones competing in it. So they won lighting design, set design, supporting actor, best director, best production, excellence in puppetry, design performance, excellence in design and use of stage blood, firearms, and pyrotechnics. So I just want to say congratulations. It's been 10 years since the zone had a festival in Port Alberni. COVID came and they were supposed to have it again, but they didn't. This is amazing for our zone to be able, and Porta Players to come and represent our community. And they're going to Main Stage, which is the provincial festival, and that is held in Chilliwack this year, July 1st to the 7th. If you didn't go see Pillowman, you should. It's a very dark comedy. It's not comedy, a very dark play. It's different than what we normally do at Porta Players. We normally do comedies because they sell, but if you haven't seen Pillowman, go and see it. It's really worthwhile. It'll help support them going to the provincial festival. And I think this is excellent. Kudos to them, and look out for Pillowman. And you'll be able to see him in a couple of, 2 more performances. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Councillor Solda. Appreciate that. Any other councillors would like to talk about? Councillor Patola, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the opportunity to be an alternate attendee at the ACRD meeting that was held last week in Ucluelet. And although many important things were discussed, the one that really was of interest to me, and I think of interest in a long-range fashion to the rest of council here, is the airport at Long Beach. The LBA is proceeding with obtaining funding, grant funding, for an expansion project. How that's funded and how that comes out isn't really the concern, but the interesting note is that the general census that I got from the meeting was the tourism industry on the West Coast is interested in promoting flights to Long Beach to promote the tourism industry with a focus on individuals that are more economically able to afford that type of transportation and the higher price hotels that are generally associated with it because they don't bring their own vehicle. I thought that was of particular note because there may be, as the tourism industry expands along those lines, an impact on individuals that drive to Long Beach, perhaps not being able to afford it anymore. That would have an impact on the Port Alberni tourism industry, as would create opportunities for the Port Alberni tourism industry to possibly promote our amenities as an alternate destination. So very long-term thinking, but keeping an eye on what everyone else in the ACRD is doing and working together, things that may hurt one way may also help in another. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patola. Appreciate that. Anyone else on council would like to talk about? Just really quickly, and of course, Madam Mayor has been away, so she's been delegating for us. And I really appreciate the fact, and just on behalf of council, that she trusts us to have a little time that she can go and do business out of town as well. So, but I went to the Community Forest AGM on the 22nd. And I'd like to just say that they were presented the $300,000 check. I didn't know we were presenting that night, or I would have worn pants. I wore shorts instead, so I feel bad. But I got some glue remover on my pants. I went right from work, so I had to change. They did say that they harvested 12,474 cubic meters of logs in 2023. They aim for 10,000 cubic meters every year, which they're targeting again, and it's going to exceed that amount probably. They've planted over 600,000 trees since Community Forest opened, and 19,000 trees were planted last year, and they do hopefully do the same, if not more, this coming year. So big thanks to the Community Forest and for inviting me and having me there. So if there is anything else, there's a motion that council receive the reports. So moved by Counselor Solda, second. Second, Counselor Patola. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. New business. Page 175 of the agenda, we have the 2023 procurement summary. The Director of Finance. Please, sir, go right ahead.
Thank you, Chair Mealy. So for 2023, the summary of all the procurements over $100,000 are provided for council and the public. Often, some of these items are also included on our website for the opportunities and bids if they are a public procurement. But generally, for the most part, they are posted online unless they are quotes for the services provided. So with that, I think the annual report might be a little bit more timely if it is done in a shorter time frame. So we're probably going to be bringing this back quarterly so that we could provide that to council and probably provide more opportunity for that reporting out in a timely fashion. So expect the first half of the year to be for 2024, brought forward shortly after the second quarter, and then moving forward, we do the quarterly reporting. So.
Thank you, Mr. McGifford. Appreciate that. And that's, again, page 175 on our agenda for everybody at home. Great information, just the transparency of the work that we need to do, who has been bidding on it, and who was a successful contractor. So those are always questions throughout the year for any council, any councillor, and of course staff. So it's just great to have it as an actual agenda item and here for everybody. So thank you very much to the Director of Finance. Do you have any questions, Councillor Zolda?
I really like this report. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to say thank you on that. But just so the public knows, can you give me a snapshot how we do the procurements? You know, like just so the public understands, like, because there's some people that have, some companies that are more than once on there, have got the bid, right? We seal the envelopes. How does it work?
So just talk about the process itself, Councillor Zolda. Sure thing, Director of Finance.
Chair Mealy, to Councillor Solda, so what we would do with a public procurement, if it's an RFP or tender, those bids would be coming in usually sealed or to an email box that is provided, and then we open up those bids when there is the end, like usually if it's closing at May 20th at 3:30, we would open up the bids after we received all the bids, and then anything that was after that time would not be a compliant bid. When it comes to quotations, we would reach out to the different companies that have an interest. Within our procurement policy, there's the option to use on a rotating basis bids through quotations if it's under the threshold. So if it's under $200,000 for construction and demo, then we can use that policy to obtain those quotations for that work. And those would be all provided to the procurement email, and then provided to the manager for review or the review committee to assess what one is the best value. And usually when it's for quotations, it's the lowest value. So that's what we would use the basis for, unless we have different qualifications. So in some, you could see in the listing, there was for price and then understanding of the work, or if there's provisions for community benefit, we can include that. But really it is specific for that procurement. So I hope that helps the public understands, but everything is done in a way that we provide that detail and then review it based on what was submitted and what was expected to be the review criteria for that procurement.
And I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I just find that some of the public would, of course, not understand how it all works. And I think it's important for them to understand too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Solda. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also really appreciated that report. I thought it was very straightforward, full of information, easy to process. Really, really good information. Consequently, I would like to move that council receive the report 2023 procurement summary dated April 9, 2024.
Thank you, Councillor Patola. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dame. Any other discussion, questions for the Director of Finance at this point? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, sir. Next up, we have appointment of corporate officer and deputy corporate officer. Looks like we have some extra people here now. We got to figure this out. No, to the corporate officer at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, for the overview of this report really is just now that I have returned as the Director of Corporate Services from my leave, that we go through and officially appoint me back as the corporate officer for the city of Port Alberni. And then also set Sarah as the deputy, just for any absences, long or otherwise, just even for vacation, just so that we have that continuity.
Thank you very much, and just want to take an opportunity to, again, welcome you back, Danielle, and really to thank Ms. Darling for all the work you've done in Danielle's time away. So thank you very much. We're very happy to have you with us and doing the work for us, so appreciate it. We have two motions. We have Councillor Haggard, please.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Mealy. I'd like to move that council appoint Danielle Lerberg, Director of Corporate Services, as corporate officer and assign the responsibility of corporate administration for the city of Port Alberni to Ms. Lerberg in accordance with Section 148 of the Community Charter effective May 27th, 2024.
Second.
Second, so we have Councillor Haggard, Councillor Solda. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, motion is carried. We have another on the other side of the page. If you could, Councillor Haggard.
I'd like to move that council appoint Sarah Darling, Deputy Director of Corporate Services, as Deputy Corporate Officer to fulfill the responsibility of corporate administration in accordance with Section 148 of the Community Charter for the city of Port Alberni during vacation, leaves, or other absences of the appointed corporate officer effective May 27th, 2024.
Thank you, Councillor Haggard. Second, Councillor Dame. Sorry, Councillor Solda. All those in favor? Opposed, motion is carried. Sorry, no discussion. We have the late items, so we'll have L3, L4, and then the notice of motion. So L3 was the uptown discussion. Councillor Solda, you have specific questions?
Well, it's not a question. Well, yes, it is a question. So, you know, like I'm looking at the merchants uptown and I feel really bad for them because there's windows being smashed. I mean, one merchant put online that she had 8 windows in one night smashed, and that's ridiculous. I don't know what we can do. I'm really frustrated because there's so much up there and there's so much potential in our uptown area. And I've had this discussion with our CAO, and he can explain what he explained to me, and I think the public needs to hear it too. And you know, like they can call the RCMP, but you know, the RCMP puts them in their car and then an hour later they're back on the road, on the streets again. So what can we do? Can we lobby? Can we do something? And maybe through you, Acting Mayor, that the CAO could explain. It's really frustrating for me, and I feel so bad for these people.
No, crime in any area is not very good, but Mr. Fox, if you have a chance.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a very complex question, and I believe a lot of cities deal with this, especially as they grow and go through different challenges. One of the ways administration and council have started to work on this is by creating the manager of community safety and social development. They just finished doing a gap analysis, and that's where we look at the services that are provided to all the residents and where the gaps are in service. A lot of behaviors we have to head off before the behaviors happen, and whether that's meaningful daily activity or other opportunities for youth or other people in the community is trying to make sure we identify those and create those opportunities to hopefully change the outcomes that happen in our community. The other way also is engaging in enhancing activity in a location, and some of this is through having the areas more activated. So how do we activate it, and how do we work with the uptown merchants or other merchants across the city to increase the activity in the areas? With increased activity usually decreases the amount of unwanted behaviors in those areas. And sometimes that is by different types of businesses staying open later at night or having a variety of hours. It's sometimes having ambassador programs or different programs where we can help the uptown merchants or other merchants in the community feel safer being out at a certain time. And then finally, it's also, we just had a presentation tonight on densification. And by densifying an area, you bring more activity to an area. That means more eyes, more cameras, more everything in an area, which then makes it less likely to have criminal behavior. So again, the city, it's a multi-prong approach, but we need to all be diligent and also make sure that the city is aware of unwanted behavior and where it happens. I know that our Community Safety and Social Development Department is working with everybody, all of our partners at the city and lots of different groups and businesses to try and improve the situation. And I know that our planning department is working towards increasing the density and activation of areas. So I hope that answers your question.
Councillor
Well,
Sullivan?
indirectly, yes. It's just really frustrating sitting in this chair and not being able to do anything. And I'm not going to speak on behalf of everybody else because I'm sure they're feeling the same thing. But, and I look at the small businesses, they have cameras in their store, and they share the pictures amongst themselves and stuff like that of people. But they still go in there. I mean, one had her planter box dumped all over it. So I just find my hands feel like they're tied, and it's frustrating for me. So I just thought I'd bring it up and ask what we could do.
Thank you, Councillor Solden. And again, it goes back to the discussion we had at the committee of the whole. And I plead to our community, if you see something, please report it. If you know that something's happening in your neighborhood or in your area that you have a camera, please send it. And I'll plea again to volunteer for community policing or go to our community safety building uptown and volunteer. And maybe the more volunteers we have, the more that we can get out. I know I don't sleep a lot, and when I don't sleep, I go for a drive and I'll go downtown. I'll go down 4th Avenue, and just in case you see something to report it. So just try to be diligent. Diligent. And when you go around, and if you see something, please report it to us so we can do something about it. So thank you, Councillor Solder, for your questions. Any other discussion on the Uptown? Nope. Okay. All right. Next up was Port Pub. Councillor Solder, do you have any specific questions?
No, my question was just an update where we're at. When is it coming back to council, just so the public will know, and through you to maybe to the CAO could answer that.
Mr. Fox, sir.
Thanks for the question. We continue to action the remedial action order that council has passed. We do have costs from the consultants on what it would cost to remediate the building. We've also sought legal advice, and we're bringing different options to council. Hopefully at the next council meeting, we'll be discussing this topic. It will be in a public meeting. So hopefully that report will answer all your questions on where we're at. We continue to do enforcement and inspections of the area, and working on with all of our agencies to try and better the situation there.
Sorry, and just really quickly, just because I know it's been discussed in the community, but there are about approximately a little over 30 units in that building that are being used for housing. Is that correct, Mr. Fox?
That is decreasing with some of the recent issues that the building is facing. It's deteriorating because of a leak in the roof. So it is, I'm unsure of if, I know 3 units were damaged recently, but I don't know if they're still occupied or not.
Thank you very much, sir. And I do appreciate the work that staff and our local fire department is doing to make sure that those vulnerable people are housed as well. So I do appreciate the work. Any other comments on Port Pub at this point? If not, we look forward to the report. Thank you very much, sir. Other than that, it was the notice of motion from Councillor Solda. Do you have it?
I do, thank you. So this came out of the committee of the whole, and so I'm going to bring this forward, that council directs staff to obtain a quote to conduct a study of the Echo Aquatic Center with regards to the potential for expansion or renovation for council consideration. And also, I would like to add to that, or tell us what is wrong and why we need to move forward on a new pool.
Okay, so that's a notice of motion, so there's no discussion on that, but I just want to make sure the corporate officer has that. Wonderful, thank you for the thumbs up. Other than that, no, it's just a notice of motion, so that's okay. We got it. Other than that, we have question period, an opportunity for the public to ask questions of council on decisions or recommendations made during the course of this meeting. A maximum of 3 questions will be permitted per speaker. For those participating electronically, we hope we can work that. Please use your raise a hand feature. I don't see anybody on there. Is there anybody in the public that would like to ask questions today on matters pertaining to this meeting? I see one member of the public. Thank you, sir, for coming, but no questions, it looks like. If not, at this point, we have a motion to adjourn. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Councillor Dane.
Thank you, and I apologize to the chair. I didn't want to let the meeting adjourn before wishing everybody a happy Pride Week, and as we celebrate Port Alberni being a welcoming and safe community for all. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dane. Appreciate that very much so. If there's nothing else, may I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Solda, second. Councillor Dame, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. 3 o'clock on the button. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Great job, Charles. No, never. No.